Just camps were I just loved the energy, and I would always come back to regular Sunday morning church and be like, "Man, why can't this be more like
Yeah.
camp?" Because camp is like chaos,
Mhm.
and it took me a while to realize, and I had some mentors finally tell me that worship isn't just Sunday morning, and I was like,
What?
"What? It's everything that I do?"
Someone came up to me and he was like, "Can I plan a worship set? These songs, we need to sing these songs," you know? My name is Laura Carlisle. Um, I am the Associate Director of Worship at Salem Lutheran Church in Tomball.
How did you end up in Houston?
So I was born and raised in Arkansas. I went to college in California, and after my junior year of college, got an internship down here in the Houston area, and I started full-time at Salem the year after that internship, um but I came by way of Arkansas, so I was born into a super musical family, and my dad was a musician. My mom homeschooled my brother and I for our whole entire lives, and so we had a ton of time to explore and, just, be creative. So I grew up playing music, and, that eventually led to the full-time job that I have today.
Yeah, and so playing music with your family, I'm assuming safe to assume that you probably had a church, you volunteered or helped at a church
Mhm.
playing worship music.
Yeah. Um, we grew up in a super traditional church, Lutheran church, um, and I think it was probably I must have been, like, 9 or 10 whenever our organist asked me if I would be a cantor for
Oh,
one of the songs, so
nice.
I cantored
Yeah.
and, like, did special music for services, offertories, things like that, um, but the first time, like, the first interaction I had with worship leading was our pastor found out that my brother and I could play guitar, and he played guitar, so we had, like, a traditional service, and then we had, like, the 15-minute, like, donut time, where everyone has their coffee, donuts, and he had these little books that had just, like, old praise songs, old worship songs, and so we would pass those out and play from those for the little 15-minute, like, donut time, and then we had, the second service that followed that, but that was, like, the first experience that I had playing from, like, a chord chart, and it's really funny because those little books didn't have chords in them, they just had, like, the lyrics, but my brother and I sat down and, like, wrote in the chords that would go in, and so I think that was probably the start of my chart-making career was with
Yeah.
those little
So
books.
then the home church you grew up in, they didn't have a contemporary service?
Mm-mm.
What was your first I guess, where did you first experience a contemporary worship service?
Yeah, so I think the first time I experienced contemporary worship was at camp, and I associated that experience of having, like, a super incredible, like, impactful worship experience with being at camp. So I think I was probably 13 or 14 before I heard, like, Chris Tomlin or really, like, any
Oh,
of that stuff. We didn't listen to, um, like, Christian radio or anything. We were Christian and went to church every Sunday, but all I really knew were hymns. Um, so the first experience that I had was at camp, and I remember, like, I think one night we sang The Stand, which is that, like, "I'll stand with
yeah.
arms high," and I was like, "What are we doing?"
My hands are raising,
Yeah,
I can't control them,
yeah.
yeah.
But that, like, experience really, really impacted me, and so when it came time for me to go to college, I thought that I wanted to be like, work at a summer camp. So, I originally went to be a DCE because I was like, "Okay, director of Christian education, I'll learn how to do, like, camp programming, I'll go work at a church camp." Um, and it's funny now that I'm in the job that I'm in, I recognize what I loved so much about that experience. Like, obviously, camp was so fun and amazing, but it was, like, the worship that I connected to, the songs, and I was like, "Oh, these are songs about God, but they sound like the songs that I have been singing and, like, hearing on the radio," you know? Um, and so it became super accessible to me all of a sudden I'm 13, 14 years old, and I'm singing, like, "All sons and daughters, all the poor and powerless" kinda stuff, and there was, like, a beauty and accessibility in that that I hadn't experienced before, um, and I love traditional worship, I love hymns, but that was the first time that I really, um, felt personally like I was like my faith was mine, you know, um, when I connected to those worship songs at camp.
Yeah, I feel like every every kid should go to camp. I mean, yeah, I remember can't remember if that was the first place I heard contemporary worship, but
Mhm.
just camps were I just love the energy, and I would always come back to regular Sunday morning church and be like, "Man, why can't this be more like
Yeah.
camp?" Because camp is like chaos
Mhm.
and, like, everyone's tired. I still remember the last time a couple years ago, the last time I led worship for a camp. I was so tired. I was like, how was I able to do this
Mhm.
and, like, do everything that the kids do and then still do the music at night?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's not for everyone," but
Yeah, different pace of life for
yeah.
sure. I don't think I realized that when I wanted to be a camp director, you know? Like, you're living summer camp all year long.
Yeah, I mean, that's summer camp state of mind.
Yep.
Maybe that's where we all need to be.
Yeah.
So how long have you been serving, in I guess, in ministry in general, but, that and how long have you been serving at, your church currently?
Yeah, so, I mean, if you count cantoring and doing, like, special music when was super young, I think that must have started when I was about 10, so I'm 27 now, 17 years. But I've been full-time at my role for the last 5 years, just celebrated my 5-year anniversary, and, yeah, so before that, I did worship leading in college, campus ministry type stuff, and so I got a little bit of experience planning worship, choosing songs, working with teams, leading rehearsals, things like that, but I've been full-time now for 5 years.
It's crazy because 5 years sounds like a lot,
Mhm.
but then when you look back, it's like it's not.
Yeah.
Feels like a blink of an eye.
Yeah.
Um, Growing up, being used to traditional style worship, when you entered your job, at the church now that you're in, I guess, did you have any expectations of what that role would, like, the day in and day out, were your expectations kind of the same as what you're experiencing, or were there some, like, discrepancies on what you thought you'd be doing, versus what you're actually doing?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. I was really lucky to have that internship experience the year before I went into full-time ministry, and I was fortunate that the internship experience I had was at the place that I now work full-time, so I got to have that, like, week to week, every day you're still thinking about worship, you know, and, um it's not the same as being a volunteer or even just attending a church where you experience the worship service on Sunday and then on Monday you're on to, whatever else. You're right back in it thinking about worship and making sure everything's in line for the next Sunday and the next Sunday and the next Sunday. So, um, I think that I was really fortunate to have that experience where I got to see for a few months, like, the pace of life of a worship leader and, just a church worker in general. So I was really fortunate to have that experience, but something that I didn't expect when I came on full time, um, I mean, we experience this in ministry, but you wear all kinds of different hats, and your team works depending on the team members, so whatever you accomplish, those roles can kind of switch around depending on who you have on your team. So when I came in, the role that I had was obviously worship leader, singing, doing some planning, things like that, but I was also over the altar team and all of, like, our communion experience and all of our baptisms, kinda like those sacramental things, and those are the things that I didn't learn when I was learning how to be a worship leader. So I'm, like, fresh out of college at 22, working with volunteers who are in their, like, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s sometimes, and so I think adjusting to that, working with people who were my parents' age, my grandparents' age, and having to like lead them, like be in charge of them was something that I wasn't expecting. Um, and there was a really steep learning curve, especially like that first couple of years. The other part of this is that I came on full time in 2019, so less than a year later, everyone shut down. So I kind of had that learning experience along with everyone else in my first year of full time ministry.
Oh, yeah.
Hmm.
That was a interesting
Hmm.
interesting year for a lot
Yeah,
of people.
and we switched to different kind of communion, and so I was all of a sudden like fresh at my job, like online trying to figure out how we can get communion supplies prepackaged, like all of this stuff. And again, I'm feel just incredibly unqualified to do it, coming straight out of college. But um, yeah, I think that that was an important thing for me to grow in like dependence on the people who knew more than me and who had been at that job longer than me. Because I got to, really, really learn from them and also to learn how to lead people that I didn't really feel qualified to lead yet.
Hmm.
Um, I got some really, really great advice early on that was basically just telling me that even though I'm young, I've been placed in this role of authority. So, like, I'm allowed to act with some authority. And I think that I needed that permission at that age, to make decisions, to, you know, not make demands, but to ask people to do, certain tasks and not feel like um, I was asking for me, like, hey, I need you to do this for me. But to realize that I was really empowering the volunteers to live out their service, you know? So um, all of that happened in those first couple years of ministry. But those were huge lessons that, like I said, that steep learning curve, it brought me to the top of that. And those lessons have like stayed with me since then.
Yeah, that's good. I was just thinking more about what you said earlier. I've been, I'm sure a lot of people have experienced this. Younger people in church ministry roles that work with volunteers or even coworkers that are older, but they
Hmm.
have, um, you know, you have more authority over them, and it's always weird because you want there's like a it's like you want their that respect to be there, but it's like once you learn how to navigate that, and it's almost, I mean, everything is easier through relationship.
Hmm.
That makes it if you want like an easy way to do that, yeah, relationship. But sometimes it's hard to like build a relationship with someone who's 80.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, I feel like that's always a point of tension, and I feel like I've experienced that at every church I've been at. There's a volunteer that's older than you, that's more qualified, and how to like to navigate that. And obviously, it's different for every context. But were there any like specific instances you can remember of just ways that I mean, you said earlier that you know, thinking of it as empowering them rather
Hmm.
than you asking them to do stuff. Are there any specific instances where you can remember like something you did that worked really well or that you were surprised by with volunteers that were, I guess, older or
Hmm.
older than you?
Yeah. There's a couple things. So during that time where we had shut down, um, obviously it was hard for us to make connections with anyone. And I was encouraged, and probably a little bit more than encouraged, like maybe told strongly, to call my volunteers. And it seems like such a small task, but um, I had, a few people who were my team leaders. And so I had calls with them regularly, and those weren't um, based around our ministry. They weren't based around me making sure that they had whatever information. They were just me checking on them and getting to know them, learning what was going on in their day to day, seeing if they needed anything. And I didn't ever get taken up on that, like I was like, if you need groceries, I'll come get groceries. But I think just the fact that we were talking and having those conversations later built a ton of trust because they knew that I cared about them, not just about what they were doing. And it's that age-old adage of, like, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So that goes just so far with volunteers, all ages. If they know that you care about them and you have to genuinely care about them, um,
It's a
yeah.
lot of work.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially, like, we knew like, I don't even know, I knew maybe 10 people, like, when I first came to work there, and I think that overall I was in charge of, like, 40 volunteers that I, hadn't met yet, so just learning who they were, the things that they cared about, um, that's just healthy for all of us as humans, but especially important whenever we're responsible for making all of these different things happen and we have to do it together and we have to do it week after week, making sure that those relationships are healthy and that those relationships exist is super, super important. Um, the other thing that was so impactful to me about that position early on, I had a volunteer who was, I think she was 83 at the time that I came. She might have been older than that. Anyway, so she was amazing, and I talked to her, so she would set up on the altar team, put the little wine in the communion cups, and every time I saw her serving, I would thank her, for being there, thank her for serving, and she had this spirit of, like, unbelievable joy, like, there was not enough capacity in her body to hold all the joy that she was feeling, and she would, um every day that she would leave, she would say, "Oh, I just love being here. I just can't believe I get to be here," you know? And I think that joy, seeing her, like, fulfill her tasks with that joy made me realize this is so much more than tasks for all of us, you know? So she taught me that, and then that kind of like inspired the attitude of our whole team to say, like, wow, I can't believe I get to be here and do this. Like, I get to prepare the elements for people to experience communion with God. Like, that is so amazing. And it was so special for her to do that. Um, so she taught me that, and that really influenced our culture.
Yeah, I always love that when you have a volunteer that, um, it's like they don't have to, love, you know, pushing a button for slides, but when you see someone that is doing something so small and they're filled with joy over it, it makes you question your attitude, um, and everything that you do.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, you're doing this from a place of joy, and obviously there's things you do, for your job that naturally, like I'm not. I think one of my frustrations is galvanizing, which is like, orchestrating, organizing, scheduling, all that stuff is a frustration of mine. So it drains me. And I've learned to, like, when I'm doing that, to not force myself, but like, just like be thankful that I don't have to work a 9 to 5
Mhm.
construction job outside when it's 100 degrees. That's just one thing to be thankful for, but during this heat.
Yeah.
But just that attitude of, there's so many other places I could be, but God chose me to be here. It's difficult when things in life are rough. It's difficult to step back and be thankful for the small things. But yeah,
Mhm.
having a volunteer like that is great.
Yeah.
Changes your whole perspective.
Yeah, that's the word I was getting ready to say, perspective, because we can get so caught up into, like, what's going on in our day to day, um, even, like, outside of our jobs. Just as humans, we see things on our level, what's immediately happening, what just happened, what am I having to plan for, prepare for, and we kinda miss the perspective of what is this all for? Um, the joy that there is in community, like in being together, and Yeah, so perspective is a huge, huge part of that. It's easy to lose.
Speaking of volunteers, on your worship team, how many people roughly are on that worship team? I guess, do you guys have I'm gonna be asking questions, and for some reason I ask the questions, I ask 3 at a time,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then I'm quiet, so I'm gonna give you 3.
Okay.
Um, so, like yeah, so how many volunteers do you have on your worship team? How many of those volunteers are paid, and how many of those are just strictly volunteers? And then the 3rd question, um, I wanted to get into was prep and preparing for Sunday. What goes into that? What does that look like, for you guys during the week?
Mhm. So that is kind of like when you talk about day-to-day stuff, that is like what my day-to-day consists of. Um, so our philosophy for, paid or volunteer musicians has changed, fluctuated with the kind of like the people that we have in our church um, over the years. So it's been a little bit different sometimes, but right now, the thing that we kind of do is we have a few positions that are paid every week. So we have someone every week who's a MD, music director. So they're the person with the mic that only goes into our ears. They're telling us, here comes a build, or they're giving us reminders for the vocals, things like that. And that person almost every week is a paid person. Um, and a lot of that is just because that role requires a lot of prep beforehand and just an extra level of commitment and responsibility on Sunday morning. The other role that we tend to pay is a drummer, and our MD tends to be our bassist. And something that I like to compare it to is like I think of those roles as like the scaffolding almost, and everything else kind of like lines up and drapes around that. But at least you have that foundational, like, these people are going to be solid. These people know where we are. They can get us back on if we get off. Um, those are like our super steady, they know what they're doing. They're not going to get freaked out kind of thing um, roles. Then we also have, over the years had people come who are amazing electric guitarists, amazing vocalists, and a lot of our vocals come from our youth actually, like a lot of our teenagers. And so sometimes they go off to college, and then you lose volunteers that way. But um so we kind of have like a mix. Some people are paid, some people volunteer. And if there's ever a week where we can't fill all of those roles with a volunteer, then we might have to pull someone in and pay them from another, place, like someone who's not a part of our regular rotation or our congregation. But that's pretty rare and mostly happens whenever there's like an emergency, like something we didn't see coming. But something that we're really fortunate to have is a pretty large worship staff. And there are probably, I mean, with our worship staff, we can cover an entire band. So if there's ever someone who, you know, gets sick or we find out that they can't come on Sunday, then someone jumps on bass, somebody jumps on electric. Um, so that is something that we have that we're really, really blessed to have. And I recognize not everyone has that opportunity. Um, But another thing that we don't have that a lot of churches do have is midweek rehearsal. So you talk about prep, and something that we do for our vocals for our band is have like a super built out planning center. So all of the information that you could need for Sunday is on Planning Center, and that just gives everyone a chance to listen beforehand. Um, we have tons of communication, if there are changes to a song, things like that, so that when everyone arrives on Sunday morning, everyone feels prepared, they're all comfortable. Um, and something that I learned since being at Salem was just like the importance of preparation and how much value that adds to a role. I can remember times when I would play in a worship band and, we'd have, like, 4 vocals, and we'd be starting a song, and we would start, verse 1, and no one knew who was singing the song, and then we'd have to stop and be like, "Wait, who's leading this song?" And so, that just creates a feeling of, like, chaos, stress a little bit, so realizing, like, how much it matters to be thought of, to be seen, um, to be considered beforehand. As a vocalist, like, I feel like sometimes we can get caught up on the band and say, like, "Okay, make sure the band has everything that they need, and vocals, you sing," you know? But we forget that those are musicians too, and the more we can prepare and um, like, show them, we value their time and their efforts beforehand, like, that creates a lot of trust, and when people show up on Sunday and um, they feel prepared, they've heard their parts, then that's a different experience, that's a more positive experience.
Did you guys have a midweek rehearsal and then did away with it, or do you haven't had one since you've been there?
We haven't had one since I've been there, but I heard of a time where there were midweek rehearsals, and I do kind of wish sometimes that we had like, I heard there was a lot of community around those rehearsals, like, people would come early and eat or, go somewhere after, like, stay and talk forever afterwards. So we've had to kind of, like, supplement that with other times for people to gather, other ways to build community because it's really easy, especially when you're only on a Sunday morning, for people to come in and then come in, do their worship, leave, and not really have that, like, connection, community as a part of a team. So, we've had to, like, build that in where it's not naturally built in for us.
I've been thinking about that a lot lately. There's been, I mean, in the summer, it's always like getting people to midweek rehearsals is rough.
Mhm.
In this past summer, I was just thinking about, um, yeah, kind of what you've been talking about, what that would look like to prepare more on the front end, um, forego the midweek rehearsal, and I and then just doing a Sunday run through before the service. I was thinking about that, but also I was thinking keep the rehearsal time and then just like get rid of the rehearsal and make it a hangout time. I'm like curious if more people would show up if it
Yeah.
was if it was just hangout time. But yeah, I think that what you said earlier, yeah, getting as a worship leader, worship director, um, I would say uh, not most. I don't know. I don't want to say most, but maybe some.
Mhm.
It's other end of the spectrum. Some worship people, it's hard to get to know your volunteers. You're doing so much. Usually on Sundays before the service, you're there's things you have to take care of and worry about. After the service, usually there's not things you have to take care of or worry about, or if you have to strike anything down, I'll usually have to break the keyboard down. And sometimes I'll go like a couple weeks and I'm like, I barely talk to my
Yeah, I haven't
team.
talked to anybody.
And I'm just like, it's just like it makes it so much more difficult to build that relationship and to have that trust. And when um, you're not really being intentional about that time of knowing, hey, everybody on my team, they all have full-time jobs, they have families.
Mhm.
How can I build relationships with them and hang out with them as much as I can, as much as time as they have, and like being intentional about that. It's something I've been thinking a lot about lately because it's hard to do that and planning and preparing more on the front end. I feel like um, that would help you make time for those relationship building events to take place. But yeah, that's midweek rehearsals. It's an interesting. I'd love to do a poll and see. Like I know a lot of people do midweek rehearsals. There's few. I didn't know you guys didn't have midweek rehearsal,
Yeah, we
but
don't do it.
um, it's interesting. Do you see? I know you talked about having everything kind of um, written out in planning center
Mhm.
beforehand. When preparing for a Sunday and putting all the details you do in there, is there anything special inside a planning center that you guys utilize, um, that you, like, tell your volunteers, like,
Mhm.
"Hey, we're gonna learn this because this is how we do things."
There's
Um,
so much.
oh, yeah.
There's so much to planning center that I love, and, there's even more that I don't know or understand that I'm sure could be
Like an
helpful. There
iceberg,
it's
yeah.
like, yeah, never ending. Um, but a couple of things that we do are we utilize all of, like, there's little categories like person, focus, music, things like that. So we fill those out with like we'll put in there who's leading what song. We'll put in there whether they're on the stage level or the altar level, whether the focus is IMAG or lyrics, things like that. So we'll use all of those tabs to kind of keep our information organized, which is really, really helpful, especially for tech. Um, Everyone having that information in front of them is awesome. But something that we do specifically for our musicians is we always, when we put in a song, we always leave the original key in there so that if we have like some transposed key, the bassist can listen to it in the original key to like hear the bass part, what's supposed to be happening. And then the other thing that we'll do, I mean, we'll also add the transposed key. And then the other thing that we do that I just love is we have vocal notes. So we'll write out um, if there's alto, tenor, or, you know, if everyone's singing in verse two, all melody, like we'll write those things out specifically. And that helps so much on Sunday morning to have like a basis. And even if we don't sing it exactly like that, at least we have an idea like, okay, verse one is probably a solo. Verse two, probably everyone is in on melody. Um, and so you kind of like have that set in place so that your people can get an idea of like what a arrangement would be. And then we also like record all of our vocal parts. So I'll sit at a piano and say, hey everyone, this is a vocal rehearsal track for the altos for this song," and then I'll play their part and sing it for them. So that takes a little, you know, extra work on our end, but it means that our people have heard their parts. Like they're coming on Sunday, like singing 3-part harmony, and it's just like on a song that they've never heard before that week, and it's just awesome to be able to see how that's paid off over the years. But of course, that only happens with mutual like investment. So if, for instance, we had, you know, we'll do 4 songs on a Sunday, and I say to our teams when someone joins a team, here's all the information. You'll have this beforehand so that you're prepared for Sunday morning. But then when they're scheduled and they go look at the plan, they don't have that information in, then that like creates a little bit of distrust. And like, if I'm not holding up my end of the bargain by like making sure you have all of this stuff ahead of time, then why would you hold up your end of the bargain by looking and prepping ahead of time, you know? So, I think that that extra effort that we put in, again, like shows our people that we care about them, that we value their time, that we value their energy, and then they tend to reciprocate. Like they're prepared when they get there on Sunday because they know that we've done all of this work ahead of time so that they can be prepared. So that's also been like a cool investment exchange. And it just creates a lot of trust that we have things filled out and they have the information that they need.
And those vocal charts,
Mhm.
do you upload them as PDFs or
Yeah,
so they
so
can, like, download them and use them on Sunday if they need to?
yes, yeah, and we have people that print them out. But I also always print them just so people can have them in hand. But yeah, we I will typically like scan it or scan it from a document and upload it as a PDF as an attachment on PCO.
Yeah, I'm ashamed to say this, but vocals, for some reason, week in, week out, vocals, especially for me, if I'm leading on an instrument, vocals tend to get like the very short end of the stick
For
when it
sure.
comes to, yeah, planning and prepping and direction. And it's like you notice it, and yeah, I think, having that stuff and even, yeah, assigning parts, is huge because, yeah, without that, it happens on Sundays and someone's like we start a song and, like, I put sometimes I'll put their name in there, they're leading, and then, like, we'll start the song, and then they won't know they're leading it, and then I'm like in my head, I'm like, "Well, didn't they look at Planning Center?" And then in my
Mhm.
mind, I'm like, "Well, I'm not consistently putting stuff in there, so they're probably not
Yeah.
consistently checking."
It's
So
a
it was like
two-way street. Mhm.
yeah, it was a crude awakening for
Yeah.
me. I realized that it's like when you pull the
You're like,
mask
"Am I the
off,
problem?"
like the
Yeah.
Scooby Doo meme, you pull the mask off and it's you
And
that's
it's just
ruining
you.
yeah,
Yep,
it's you that's
yep.
ruining your own plans.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's so easy for us to, like, not think of vocals as a music like, uh, an instrument, you know? Or we don't think of vocalists as musicians. I remember singing in college one time at a church, like, I was guest worship leading, and I asked a question about a rhythm, and I specifically said, like, "Is it on this like, on the 3rd 16th note, whatever?" And the pianist, like, looked at me, and she was like, you're talking like you're using beats and stuff?" Like, and I was like, "Yeah," and I think that that's something that we don't often think about, you know, but your voice is an instrument, vocalists are musicians too. There's so much about phrasing and expression that's really, really important, um, that we can tend to ascribe to the musicians to make the build happen or whatever, you know? But so much of that can come from vocals if we just invest in them in the right way.
Yeah, empower them, make sure they
Mhm.
have the tools. Um, so you record your own so you do, every Sunday, you're recording those vocal parts, and if it's a new song, will you use the one you recorded last time you played it, or you make a new one, depending on, like, if there's new volunteers on that team,
Mhm.
or do you something you reuse?
So we upload them to the song in Planning Center.
So it's just attached for life.
Yep.
Nice.
Yep. Yeah, and, there have been a couple of times when we'll change a key by, like, a half step or a whole step, and I'll just transpose the voice like, the vocal rehearsal track. So, I've either got,
Using
like
the planning center,
yeah.
yeah.
So, I've got, like, a little chipmunk voice or, like, a really low voice, but, you know, they can sing along with it, so that's all that matters.
Yeah, and in my mind, I was thinking of another question, but I think you kind of already answered it earlier, when we were talking about your expectations
Mhm.
of what it means to be in a worship role at a church.
Yeah.
No, I was thinking of another question, and it was, is there anything and you kinda answered this when you said you were helping out with communion and the baptisms, like, is there anything you're doing currently, in your job that you never thought or that you didn't think you would be doing?
Yes. Yeah, so, um, another huge part of my role for a long time was, um, doing all of our funerals. So I got to meet with our funeral families, and I think that it's interesting because you don't really think of that as something that is a worship leader's job, but in our um like way of doing it, we have a funeral meeting with a family, um, and that involves a pastor, worship leader, and their whoever they want in that meeting. So that's been a really cool experience actually because I think at first I was like, I have no clue what to do. Like I can bring no comfort, I can bring no information that will help them. And I just really felt helpless. But over time, it's been really like fulfilling to see how when someone loses someone, you feel like you can't do anything, you know, and there's nothing you can provide that would be like helpful or comforting. And in that role, there is something that I can provide to be helpful and comforting, you know, like whether that's working with them to make a super unique, specific service that celebrates their loved one, or they want to be hands off and we craft a service for them. Um, that's been super fulfilling because all of a sudden, like, I can help, so that's been awesome. And then the other part of my job that takes up most of my time now is working with students. So I work with all of our worship students from 7th to 12th grade. So I'm working with them, you know, some of that's teaching so that they can lead. I also teach our 6th through 8th graders for our chapel band, and so I just came from that class today. But yeah, that's something that I didn't ever think that I would be doing, working with kids, working with students. And man, talk about like vulnerability, talk about um, transparency, like something that we go over a lot with our student worship leaders is like, you're not just leading worship when you're on stage, you're leading worship all the time. Like, you are known as the worship leader. When you step off stage, you're still, the worship leader. And so being able to like help students grow with that and like even learn from them has been just awesome.
Yeah, that's a key piece of something that um, growing up, it wasn't until high school or till late my junior or senior year that I had a mentor tell me, hey, like worship isn't just on Sunday mornings because I had definitely, as a younger kid, compartmentalized a lot of my life, and rehearsal. I think Thursday night rehearsals, give God an hour of my time. Then
Mhm.
it's all about God. Sunday morning, it's all about God. Then the rest of the week is just like anything but.
Mhm.
And it took me a while to realize. And I had some mentors finally tell me that worship isn't just Sunday morning. And I was like,
What?
what? It's everything that I do. Yes, it's yeah. And it's so funny how the word worship, it, even when I say worship leader, it's like
What does that mean?
sometimes I'll put in Planning Center, I'll put welcome by worship leader. And then in my mind, I'm like, well, that could be the pastor,
Mhm.
that could be the guitar player, that could be literally everybody that's involved with the service as a worship leader.
Mhm.
The guy running the slides,
Worship leader.
worship leader, and it's like it's such a it again, it changes your perspective of like if everything that I do is worship, it makes you change. Obviously, if you're doing stuff that you shouldn't be doing, but it kind of makes you appreciate the gift of worship.
Yeah.
It's just like we get to worship constantly, and everything that we do. Obviously, it looks different in various forms. Um, it's like a Pokemon.
Yeah.
Worship has evolved into
Oh,
I don't know,
no.
yeah.
Oh,
So
no.
cut that one out.
Yeah.
um, so as far as the worship ministry at your church you're serving at, what is one thing that you're most excited about that's either coming up in the future, something that you guys are doing right now, that just personally like you're excited? You're like, yes. Is there anything like that going on?
Absolutely. Um, our students really, really excite me. Like, the way that um the passion that they have for worship, the care that they have, like, even this past Sunday, I went out after the service and was talking with some of them, and, uh, someone came up to me and he was like, "Can I plan a worship set? These songs, we need to sing these songs," you know? And just how much um like, how invested they are and the joy that they get from it is really encouraging, and I'm really, really excited about this next generation of worshipers and worship leaders. Um, every summer, we have a kids choir, and so we're also kind of coming off of that here at the end of the summer, but, um, we've got kids who are, like, 1st graders leading us in worship, and it's just such a cool reminder that, um, the church is generational and will continue long after we're gone. So being intentional about what we do to speak into the next generation, um, it just can't be overstated, like how important that is. And that's listening to them, that's, giving them chances to lead. We always say, like, if a student is up there leading, that's success. Like, that is a win for our team, for our worship life. And then we'll work on how they sound, or we'll work on stage presence, all of that will come later. But just like their willingness to lead, their comfort, being in front of people and being the leader of their peers and even people older than them, like those are lessons that they'll carry with them. And that's what is going to sustain our church. Um, so I count myself so fortunate that I get to witness that firsthand and like speak into students and to have them speak into me. Like so many of them are so in touch with their faith in ways that I think we don't expect them to be able to, but their faith is personal to them. And so that's been encouraging to watch, exciting to watch. And yeah, I'm really pumped for the next generation.
Yeah, it's so funny. I feel like in all of our conversations, we've been kind of hinting at, like generational,
Yeah.
and there's going to be people your age, and if I go back in time, I would tell myself, hey, when you work at a church, it's going to be multi-generational.
Yep.
Like you're not, and that was the funny thing about college was like you worked with mainly people that were your age, and then you get used to that, and then all of a sudden you go to a church and you're like the spectrum. You're working with children and then also 80-year-old people, and it's like to navigate that. I mean, it's difficult, but it's like people people can be the most frustrating thing about church and like also the best thing about
For
church.
sure.
Um, and those the older people. I had somebody tell me one time, if that old guy that always complains about stuff, the music's too loud or this and that, he told me, listen to him
Hmm.
and take what he says because he's there every Sunday. He doesn't leave because it's easier if I go to a church and I don't like something, I can just be a consumer. I can just go down the street. What do they call it? Church shopping.
Yeah.
Um, but he said, listen to them because they have stuck around and they care more. And it's like they're annoying, but like, and that changed my perspective on how to interact with older people in the congregation. That like I fully know that they don't respect contemporary music. I
Hmm.
fully know that like yeah, they roll their eyes when they hear it or whatever. But it's like for us to love those people and minister to them, and those people sometimes will be on our teams.
Yeah.
And it's like the relationship and being intentional, making time for getting to know them
Mhm.
is huge.
Yeah. I think that it's also important to note that there's a reason that they think what they think for the most part, like, and a lot of the times it comes down to like they just really care about something specifically. And, you know, once you've built up that relationship where you can have those kinds of conversations, then you can say like, "Hey, I know this is really frustrating to you. Can you tell me why? Or can you tell me why that's the way that you feel?" Or, just being able to understand where they're coming from, because oftentimes it'll be like an experience that they had, and so all of a sudden it's not your service that they are, upset about, but they have been like hurt by something in their past that doesn't have anything to do with you. And so, like, once you can have those conversations and like kind of unpack some of that, then you've been a listening ear for someone, and that goes a long way. And you can say, I actually really care about that too. Let's get on the same page about, like, we both care about this. How amazing. Like, let's just notice that for a second. And then you're working with them rather than against them. It's like you and them against the problem rather than you against each other. Um, and you said something else about the older people.
They can be annoying. No, I'm kidding. No, we can all be annoying sometimes.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I don't remember. I said a lot of
I don't
things.
know.
I was also thinking of Just lost it. It's probably
It's great.
that's how you know it should just
Yeah.
um see, what were you just saying?
It
You
was
were
about old people.
other no, okay.
Yeah. No, they're the best.
Yes. No, yeah, there was just to talk a little more about just being kind of like what we said earlier, being on a team with
Mhm.
leading a team specifically with people that are older than you and might be more qualified. Um, when I was in Florida, the church I was at, uh, electric guitar player, really good, really good musician. He just had an attitude problem, and for the first couple months, I was just like, "That's who he is. He's got an attitude problem." And then, because I don't like, um, it's not that I don't like conflict resolution. I just don't like
I love
conflict.
conflict.
I love
Just
to
like being
resolve
in
it. Yeah.
conflict. Yeah.
I just love the resolution part of it, not the conflict part. But like I was kind of worried because I don't do well in the situations and I was always worried like he's gonna steamroll me. And one day I was just like, you know what? God was telling me, hey, just reach out. Reached out. His attitude problem was that he was going through a divorce and wasn't really talking about it with anybody. And that opportunity of me just stepping out and saying, like, I don't know what's gonna happen, like helped our relationship out so much because I knew that it wasn't me, and
Mhm.
so I can sleep at night now knowing that I'm not making someone's life miserable. Um, yeah,
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say earlier. I remember now. Um, it typically is not a heart issue. You know what I'm saying? Like, if they're stepping up and, like, serving, and they wanna be there, and they're showing up, and they're learning their parts, like, it typically is not a heart issue. It's typically something else, like, you know, it doesn't have to do with what's going on in this actual circumstance. Um, I feel like it's pretty rare that you ask the question like, "Hey, what's going on?" And they're like, "I'm just deeply unhappy to be here." Like, it's not
your
normally
face
that.
just
Yeah.
really upsets me.
Yeah, yeah. It's not typically that. Normally, it's like, "Oh, there's just something else going on that we can sort out and, like, get get that out of the way, get on the same side of it, like, we can figure that out." But it rarely ever comes down to them saying, like, "I just don't wanna be here," you know? And if that is the case, then, like, God is the one who works on our hearts, but he's gonna be with us whenever we figure out those other things, so, um, yeah, I feel like it's pretty normal that people's hearts are in the right place. It's just all of the extra stuff that's around us, can get us mixed up and sideways with each other, but when we get down to the heart of it, that's typically, you know, gonna be solid.
The heart of worship.
That's right.
Should make a song.
I'm going no.
um, last question. Um, week in, week out. You know, considering you said earlier that you have to be more creative with the ways that you engage with your team outside of Sunday morning.
Mm.
Are there some examples that you have of that, and like how much communication are you having with your team outside of those? Hey, this is the stuff you need to know for Sunday, and then seeing them on Sunday outside of that. I
Mhm.
guess how much communication are you engaging in with them?
Yeah, a lot of it is personal, so, like, we'll be taking people to coffees, and especially with students. Students love coffee, and me too, you know? So, that's just the best part of my
Did you
job.
drink coffee in high school?
Not in high school, I waited till college.
Yeah, I don't think I drank coffee in high
No,
school.
everyone drinks coffee in high
That's
school now,
crazy.
I know.
Mm,
But also, so if they don't, then they'll drink a tea, which is
mm.
yeah. Lots of coffees though, lunches. Um, we've done a couple things. It's really more, um we're aspiring, you know, which we should always be, but, we've done a couple things where, like, we'll invite all of our vocalists to a service to sing all together. Having, like, kids choir, being able to, like, speak into people outside of a Sunday morning has been amazing, but, yeah, a lot of it is, like, personal one-on-one conversations and, I mean, we'll send, like, a group text if there's something that everybody needs to know, group email, but even in that, like, making sure that we're communicating in a way that isn't, "Here's the information you need, see you Sunday," you know? It's like, "Man, I can't believe we get to worship together again. Thank you so much for serving on our team. Um, None of this can happen without you." You know, like, being able to, like, affirm the community, build them up, encourage them outside of just in rehearsal. And we also have some time on Sunday morning where we can, like, some downtime where we get to talk and hang out. We have 2 services with some time in between them. So we also are intentional about that time, making sure we're, chatting, and if people want to, then they can, be a part of a conversation, be, you know, talking, stuff like that. But yeah, I definitely want to have some more opportunities for them to just be together and get to know each other. I also try to not schedule the same exact people together all the time. That way they get to know the other people on the team. But those are just little things that we do.
Yeah, I've always dreamt, say dreamt of doing like once a month worship team get-togethers, and it's like grandiose idea. It's going to be perfect. There's going to be some discipleship, some singing, talking about worship, and then it's just like you get all these ideas, and then you go to pick a day, and you're like,
No one can
nobody,
come. Yeah.
everyone's busy on another day, and it's like navigating that is tough. And so you guys don't you guys don't do like big event group stuff that much
So we have, like, our department traditionally has always done like a Cinco de Mayo big meal or like an
with the
Oktoberfest type
staff
thing,
and
uh, with our worship staff and all of our volunteers.
God,
So
okay.
that's like all of our tech volunteers, all of our musicians and stuff. But yeah, it is hard. Like, how do you invest in them without just taking another day of their week or taking another day of the month? And how do you make it, valuable for them? Like, how do you make that time valuable for them? I think it's a little bit easier with students because you can, kind of have pizza and a game and they have a great time. Honestly, maybe that's what we should be doing with the adults too. I love
Yeah,
pizza, and
it's true.
games. Um, but yeah, we'll do some events, like we do specific recruiting events with our uh students. So we'll have the worship band come and play, and we'll have a time where everyone can like come up on the stage and look around and see what it's like. They can get in the tech booth and look at the soundboard and all the buttons and stuff like that. So those are like events that we have that are part community for the people that are already on our teams, but also like experiential for the people who are thinking about joining the team and aren't sure. And they get to be around the people that are on the team, and you have all of these amazing advocates who are saying, "This is so fun. This is the best, come join." So, those events are also awesome.
Thank you so much for watching another episode of the Worship Unplugged podcast. Do us a favor, and if you can, like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends. It would really mean a lot to us. We'll see you on the next one.